I was standing in the main drawing room of our Kensington home when Marcus walked in without knocking. It was a Thursday afternoon, around 3 o'clock. Gerald was at his club like he was every Thursday. Marcus hadn't called ahead, which immediately put me on alert. In the 8 years I'd been married to his father, unannounced visits from Marcus never meant anything good. He walked straight to the bar cart and poured himself 3 fingers of Macallan without asking. I watched him from where I stood by the window, my hands folded calmly in front of me. He was wearing an expensive suit that hung wrong on him, rumpled at the shoulders like he'd slept in it. His tie was loosened, his eyes slightly bloodshot. It was 3 in the afternoon, and Marcus Ashford was already drunk. "Vivian," he said, not looking at me. He took a long drink, then turned to face me with that expression I'd come to know well over the years. That mixture of contempt and something else, something that looked almost like fear but manifested as aggression. "Marcus," I replied evenly. "Gerald isn't here. He won't be back until around 6. "I know where my father is." He took another drink. "I came to talk to you." I didn't move from the window. The afternoon light was filtering through the sheer curtains, casting long shadows across the Persian rug that had been in the Ashford family for 3 generations. I'd learned early in this marriage not to react too quickly to Marcus's provocations. He fed on reaction. "All right," I said. "I'm listening." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. He set his glass down hard on the mahogany side table, the kind of careless gesture that made me wince internally. That table was 18th century. But I said nothing. I waited. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" Marcus walked closer, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. "Coming into this family with your designer clothes and your investment portfolio, making my father think you actually love him." I felt something tighten in my chest, but my face remained calm. I'd had 8 years of practice at this. 8 years of Marcus's insinuations, his barely veiled hostility, his constant reminders that I was an outsider in what he considered his family. "I do love your father," I said quietly. "That's never been in question." "Right." He laughed again, that harsh sound. "You loved him so much you couldn't wait for my mother to be cold in her grave before you swooped in." "Your mother died 4 years before I met Gerald," I said, keeping my voice level. "And she'll always have my respect. I've never tried to replace her." "Good," Marcus said, taking a step closer. "Because you never could." I should have walked away then. I should have excused myself, gone upstairs, called Gerald, anything but stand there and continue this conversation. But something in Marcus's demeanor that day was different, more aggressive, more desperate, and I needed to understand why. "Marcus, what is this really about?" I asked. "You didn't come here to insult me. You've been doing that for 8 years. What's different today?" His jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought he might actually tell me the truth about whatever was eating at him. Instead, he picked up his glass again and finished the whiskey in one swallow. "My father isn't getting any younger," he said. And there it was, the real reason for this visit. "He's 72 years old. He had that scare 6 months ago." The hospital incident. Gerald had been there for 3 days with what the doctors called a minor cardiac event. But I'd seen his medical files by accident when I brought him his reading glasses. I knew it was more than minor. I knew the prognosis was worse than Gerald was telling anyone. My husband had asked the doctors to keep the full extent of his condition confidential, and I'd honored that wish, even though it killed me to carry that knowledge alone. "Your father is taking excellent care of his health," I said carefully. "I'm sure he is." Marcus set the glass down again. "With your help, of course. You're so attentive, so concerned about his well-being." "Of course I'm concerned. I love him." "You love what he has." Marcus's voice was getting louder now. "You love this house, the cars, the properties, the investment portfolio, the company shares. You love the Ashford name and what it represents." I felt anger stirring in me now, despite my efforts to remain calm. I had £12 million before I met your father, I said quietly. I built my own career over 25 years. I didn't need Gerald's money. 12 million. He smirked. How quaint. My father is worth £45 million, and you knew that when you married him. I married him because I loved him, I repeated, because he was kind and intelligent and made me laugh, because after my first husband died and I spent 15 years alone raising Julian, Gerald made me want to share my life with someone again. How touching. Marcus's voice dripped with sarcasm. And now you're positioned perfectly, aren't you? The devoted wife, the caring companion in his golden years, setting yourself up very nicely for when he dies. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my face neutral. That's a horrible thing to say. It's the truth. He moved closer still, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. But here's what you need to understand, Vivienne. My father can do whatever he wants while he's alive. He can parade you around, introduce you as his wife, let you play lady of the manor. But when he dies, this all ends. I felt my pulse quickening. What are you talking about? I'm talking about reality. Marcus's face was flushed now, his eyes hard. I'm talking about blood and law and family. I'm talking about the fact that Diane and I are his children, his real children, his flesh and blood. And you? You're just the woman he married in his old age. I'm his wife, I said, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. I have been for 8 years. And that means something now, Marcus said, while he's alive. But when he dies, Vivienne, when my father finally dies, do you know what you're going to get? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The cruelty in his voice was so naked, so raw, that it actually shocked me despite years of his hostility. Marcus leaned in closer, and that's when he said it. The words that would change everything. My father can have married you, but when he dies, you're going to the streets like a dog, and all you'll take with you is his death certificate. The silence that followed was absolute. I heard the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I heard a car passing on the street outside. I heard my own breathing, careful and controlled. But I didn't speak. I couldn't find words that would adequately respond to such calculated cruelty. Marcus was watching me, waiting for a reaction, waiting for me to cry, to argue, to defend myself, waiting for me to give him the satisfaction of knowing he'd wounded me. I didn't give it to him. Instead, I picked up my Hermès bag from the chair where I'd left it. I checked my watch, a Cartier that Gerald had given me on our 5th anniversary. I had a meeting with a client in 45 minutes in Mayfair, and I wasn't going to be late because of Marcus Ashford's pathetic attempt to intimidate me. "Excuse me," I said calmly. "I have an appointment." I walked past him toward the door. He grabbed my arm as I passed, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to stop me. "Did you hear what I said?" he demanded. I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. "I heard you," I said quietly. "Every word. And I have an appointment." I pulled my arm free, gently but firmly. "Please lock up when you leave. And Marcus, don't let yourself in unannounced again. This is my home too." I walked out of the drawing room, down the hallway, with its family portraits that included none of me, past the study where Gerald worked on his memoirs, and out the front door. My driver was waiting with the Bentley. I got in, gave him the address in Mayfair, and sat back against the leather seats. It was only then, in the privacy of the car, that I allowed my hands to shake. Only then that I felt the full impact of what Marcus had said. The viciousness of it, the calculated cruelty. The absolute certainty in his voice that when Gerald died, I would be cast aside like garbage. But what Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that tomorrow morning, my son Julian would be opening the safe in Gerald's study. Gerald had given Julian power of attorney over certain documents weeks ago, part of what my husband had vaguely described as getting affairs in order. I hadn't pushed for details because Gerald's health was a sensitive topic, and I trusted him to handle his business as he saw fit. Tomorrow morning, Julian would open that safe. And when he saw what was inside, when he read the documents that Gerald had prepared with his lawyer Richard Beaumont during those 2 days they'd spent locked in the study 3 weeks ago, everything would change. But I didn't know that yet. As I sat in the back of the Bentley, watching London pass by through tinted windows, all I knew was that Marcus had finally shown me exactly how much he hated me. 8 years of cold shoulders and snide comments had culminated in that one brutal sentence. "You're going to the streets like a dog." I thought about Gerald then. My husband, who I genuinely loved despite what his children believed. Gerald, who had pursued me for 6 months after we met in Zurich, who'd courted me with the patience of a man who understood that I'd been burned before. My first husband, Julian's father, had died in a car accident when our son was only 3 years old. I'd spent 15 years alone after that, building my career, raising my boy, protecting my heart. Gerald had broken through those defenses slowly, carefully. He'd respected my independence, admired my success, treated me as an equal partner. When he proposed, it wasn't with promises of security or wealth. It was with a simple question: would you like to spend the rest of our lives making each other happy? I'd said yes because the answer was genuinely yes, not because of his money, despite what Marcus believed. I had my own money, I had my own life, my own career, my own identity. Gerald enhanced that life, he didn't define it. But his children had never seen it that way. From the moment Gerald introduced me to Marcus and Diane, I was the enemy, the interloper, the gold digger who had trapped their elderly father. Never mind that Gerald was only 64 when we married, still vital and sharp and running his company. Never mind that I was 48 with my own fortune. In their eyes, I was the villain in a story they'd written where they were the victims. Diane had been icily polite from the start, all cutting remarks disguised as concern. "Father, are you sure this is wise at your age?" "Vivian, you must be so relieved to have such security. I hope you've both signed a good prenuptial agreement." Marcus had been openly hostile, refusing to attend our wedding, boycotting family events where I was present, making it clear that in his mind, I would never be family. Gerald had asked me to be patient. "They loved their mother," he'd said. "Catherine was sick for a long time before she died. They watched her suffer. It's hard for them to see me with someone else." I'd been patient. I'd been understanding. I'd endured 8 years of subtle and not so subtle abuse because I loved Gerald and didn't want to force him to choose between his wife and his children. I'd smiled through Diane's barbed comments at Christmas dinners. I'd ignored Marcus's deliberate slights at business functions. I'd maintained my dignity when Diane told her daughters they didn't need to call me grandmother because we didn't share blood. But today, something had broken. Today, Marcus had finally said out loud what he'd been thinking for 8 years. And in doing so, he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. My phone buzzed. A text from Gerald. "How was your day, darling? Home by 6 as promised. Let's go to that Italian place you love for dinner." I stared at the message for a long moment. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Should I tell him about Marcus? About what his son had said to me in our own home? But what good would it do? Gerald would be devastated. He'd confront Marcus. There would be another family explosion, another round of tears and accusations and temporary reconciliations that solved nothing. Gerald's health was fragile. The stress wasn't good for him. And I knew, even if Gerald didn't want to admit it, that his time was limited. Did I want to spend his final months, maybe his final year, embroiled in family warfare? I typed back, "Sounds perfect. See you at 6. Love you." I hit send and put the phone away. The Bentley was pulling up to my client's office building in Mayfair. I checked my reflection in the compact mirror from my bag. My makeup was perfect. My hair was perfect. My expression was composed. No one looking at me would know that 15 minutes ago, my stepson had verbally eviscerated me in my own home. This was what I'd learned in 56 years of life. You survive what you must. You smile when you need to. You hold yourself together until you're alone, and then you let yourself feel whatever you need to feel. But in public, in business, in battle, you never let them see you break. I got out of the car and walked into the building, my heels clicking on the marble floor, my head held high. I had a meeting with a client who wanted advice on diversifying her portfolio. I had a life and a career that existed entirely independent of Marcus Ashford and his poison. But as I rode the elevator up to the 14th floor, I couldn't stop hearing his voice. "You're going to the streets like a dog," the certainty in his tone, the satisfaction. He'd been planning that little speech, I realized, probably rehearsing it, waiting for the right moment to deliver maximum impact. What Marcus didn't understand was that I'd survived worse than him. I'd lost my first husband suddenly, traumatically, when I was 31 years old with a 3-year-old son. I'd built a career from nothing in a male-dominated industry. I'd made my first $1 million by the time I was 40. I'd faced down boardrooms full of men who thought a woman had no business giving them financial advice. Marcus Ashford and his cruel words were nothing compared to what life had already thrown at me. But still, his words hurt. Because no matter how independent I was, no matter how much money I had in my own name, no matter how successful my career, there was a small part of me that feared exactly what Marcus had articulated. That when Gerald died, I would be cast out. That his children would erase me from the family history. That 8 years of my life, 8 years of genuine love and partnership, would be dismissed as if they'd never existed. I pushed those thoughts aside as I walked into my client's office. This was Marjorie Henderson, a widow in her 60s who'd recently received a substantial life insurance payout and needed guidance on making it last. We spent 90 minutes going over her options, discussing risk tolerance, planning for her future. It was good, solid work. The kind of work I'd been doing for 30 years, the kind of work that had built my fortune and my reputation. When I left the meeting, it was nearly 5 o'clock. The driver took me home to Kensington. Gerald's car was already in the driveway, which surprised me. He wasn't usually home until 6 on Thursdays. I found him in his study, sitting at his desk with a glass of scotch. He looked tired, older than his 72 years. When he saw me, though, his face brightened in that way that still made my heart skip, even after 8 years. "There's my beautiful wife," he said, standing to kiss me. "How was your meeting?" "Productive," I said. "Why are you home early?" "Didn't feel well at the club," he admitted. "Nothing serious, just tired. Thought I'd come home and rest before dinner." Fear shot through me. Tired was how it had started last time, before the hospital incident. "Gerald, maybe we should call Dr. Morrison." "I'm fine, darling." He touched my face gently. "Just an old man who needs more sleep than he used to. Now tell me about your day. You seem tense." I hesitated. This was my opening. I could tell him about Marcus, about the threat, about everything. But looking at Gerald's face, seeing the weariness there, I couldn't do it. "Just a long day," I said instead. "I'm going to change for dinner. Give me 20 minutes." I went upstairs to our bedroom, the master suite that overlooked the garden. I changed out of my business attire into a simple black dress. As I was fixing my hair, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. 56 years old. Still attractive, I supposed, though the gray in my hair was more prominent now, the lines around my eyes deeper. But I looked like what I was, a woman who'd lived, who'd worked, who'd earned everything she had. "You're going to the streets like a dog." I closed my eyes against the memory of Marcus's voice. "Tomorrow," I told myself. Tomorrow Julian would be here, would open that safe, would access whatever documents Gerald had prepared. Tomorrow we'd deal with whatever came next. Tonight I would go to dinner with my husband and pretend that everything was fine. Bloco 2, flashback contexto, 1.800 palabras, ach 9 minutos, 14:22 block. 2. Flashback context. I met Gerald Ashford 9 years ago at an investment conference in Zurich. I was 47 years old, and I'd gone to that conference the way I'd gone to hundreds of others over the previous 2 decades. Alone, focused, there strictly for business. I was presenting a paper on emerging markets in Southeast Asia, specifically Vietnam and Indonesia, and my panel was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon on the second day. Gerald was in the audience. I didn't notice him at first. I was concentrating on my presentation, fielding questions from fund managers and institutional investors who wanted to know about risk factors and political stability. But afterward, during the networking reception, he approached me with a glass of wine in each hand. "Ms. Moreau," he said, offering me one of the glasses. That was the most intelligent analysis of Vietnamese manufacturing I've heard in years. Most people are still stuck on China. I took the wine, studying him. Tall, silver-haired, probably mid-60s, with sharp blue eyes and an expensive suit that fit him perfectly. British accent, old money in the way he carried himself. "Thank you," I said. "And you are?" "Gerald Ashford. I ran a property development company in London until I retired 3 years ago. Now I just manage my own investments and try not to bore myself to death." I laughed, despite myself. "Is it working?" "Not particularly," he smiled. "Which is why I come to conferences like this, hoping someone will say something interesting enough to justify the ticket price. You succeeded." We talked for 20 minutes about markets, about the shift of manufacturing from China to Southeast Asia, about infrastructure development and currency risks. It was the kind of conversation I had regularly in my work, but there was something different about Gerald. He listened more than he talked. He asked thoughtful questions, and he treated my expertise with genuine respect, not the subtle condescension I'd grown accustomed to from men in finance. "Are you free for dinner?" he asked as the reception was winding down. "There's a wonderful little place near the lake. Swiss cuisine, nothing fancy, but the food is excellent." I should have said no. I'd spent 16 years being careful about my personal life, keeping men at a professional distance, protecting the walls I'd built after Daniel died. But something about Gerald made me say yes. That dinner lasted 4 hours. We talked about everything except business. He told me about growing up in Manchester, the son of a factory worker who'd built his company from nothing. About his first wife, Catherine, who died of breast cancer 4 years earlier after a 2-year battle. About his children, Marcus and Diane, both adults now with their own lives. He spoke about Catherine with such obvious love and respect that instead of making me uncomfortable, it actually made me trust him more. This was a man who knew how to honor the woman he'd loved. I told him about Daniel, about losing him when Julian was only 3, about the terror of being a young widow with a toddler and a junior position at an investment firm, about building my career while raising my son alone, about the years of sacrifice and hard work that had gotten me to where I was. "You must be very proud," Gerald said, "of what you've built. Not many people have that kind of resilience." "I didn't have a choice," I said. "I had a son to raise and bills to pay." "There's always a choice," he replied. "You could have remarried quickly for security. You could have given up on your career. You chose the harder path because you wanted your son to see his mother succeed on her own terms. That takes courage." It was the first time in years that someone had acknowledged what those years had cost me. Not just the long hours and the struggle, but the loneliness. The years of being alone because I was too busy or too tired or too afraid to let anyone close. I went back to London the next day, and I thought that would be the end of it. A pleasant dinner with an interesting man at a conference. But Gerald called me 2 days later. "I'm going to be in London next week," he said. "Business meeting that I can't avoid, unfortunately. Would you have dinner with me?" We had dinner, then another dinner 2 weeks later, then lunch, then a weekend in the Cotswolds. Gerald pursued me with patience and consistency, never pushing, never demanding, but always there. He sent flowers to my office with notes that made me laugh. He remembered details I'd mentioned in passing. He treated me like I was someone worth pursuing, not a conquest to be won. It took me 6 months to let my guard down completely. 6 months of slowly realizing that this man was genuine, that he admired my independence rather than being threatened by it, that he wanted a partner, not someone to take care of or control. I met Marcus and Diane 7 months after that first dinner in Zurich. Gerald wanted to introduce us at a family dinner at his home in Kensington. The same home where, years later, Marcus would tell me I'd be thrown out like a dog. I remember that first dinner vividly. Diane arrived wearing pearls and the expression of polite skepticism. Marcus showed up 40 minutes late, already half drunk. They were both civil enough during the meal, but I felt their judgment in every exchanged glance, every careful question. "So, Vivian," Diane said over dessert, "Father tells us you work in finance. That must be interesting." "I find it fascinating," I replied. "I've been doing it for over 20 years. And you have a son?" This was Marcus, his tone suggesting that having a child was somehow suspicious. "Yes, Julian. He's 23, finishing law school." "How nice." Diane's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Will he be joining you and Father for the holidays?" The implication was clear. I was inserting myself and my son into their family traditions. Never mind that Gerald had invited me, that Julian had his own plans with friends. In Diane's mind, I was already the interloper. After dinner, Gerald walked me to my car. "They'll come around," he said. "They just need time. Catherine's death was hard on them." "Of course," I said, though I already knew they wouldn't come around. I'd seen that look before, in business, in life. The look that said, "You don't belong here." But I loved Gerald. And when he proposed to me 6 months later, on a quiet evening in his study, with no grand gestures or elaborate plans, just a simple question about spending the rest of our lives together, I said yes. We married quietly at a registry office. Marcus didn't attend. Diane came but left immediately after the ceremony. Julian was there, supportive as always, though I could see his concern. He'd pulled me aside the night before. "Mom, are you sure about this?" he'd asked. "His kids hate you. That's not going to get easier." "I know," I'd said. "But I love him, Julian, and I'm 50 years old. If I let other people's opinions stop me from being happy now, when will I ever allow myself that?" Julian had hugged me then. "Just promise me you'll protect yourself. Legally, financially, all of it." "I always do," I'd assured him. And I had. Gerald and I had signed a prenuptial agreement, though he'd fought against it. "I don't want you to think this is about money," he'd said. "It's not," I'd replied, "but it protects both of us. It makes things clear." The prenup stated that in the event of divorce, we'd each keep what we brought into the marriage, my £12 million, his £45 million estate. It was standard, sensible, exactly what two wealthy people marrying later in life should do. What I didn't know then was that prenups meant nothing when it came to inheritance. That was governed by wills and trusts and laws that I'd never had reason to study. I assumed, naively perhaps, that Gerald would take care of things fairly, that his children would get the bulk of his estate, as was right, and I'd be provided for reasonably. The first year of marriage was actually happy. Gerald and I traveled, we entertained, we enjoyed our life together. His children kept their distance, which was fine with me. I had my work, my own friends, my own life. I didn't need their approval, but then Gerald had his first health scare. A minor episode, the doctor said, a warning sign. He needed to reduce stress, watch his diet, take certain medications. He recovered quickly, and we went back to normal life. Except things weren't normal. Marcus and Diane started appearing more frequently, suddenly concerned about their father's well-being. Diane would drop by for tea, staying for hours, talking about family matters, and the legacy father built. Marcus started attending business functions again, reminding everyone that he was Gerald Ashford's son and heir. And the comments started. Little digs, subtle insults, reminders that I was the second wife, the outsider, the temporary addition to the Ashford family. "Vivian, you must be so worried about Father's health," Diane would say, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It must be frightening given your age difference." "Are you enjoying the house?" Marcus asked once at a charity gala. "Must be quite an upgrade from wherever you lived before." I ignored them. I maintained my dignity. I focused on Gerald, on making sure he was happy and healthy and surrounded by love. But underneath, I felt their hostility growing, and I began to understand that they saw me as a threat to their inheritance. 6 months ago, Gerald had the cardiac incident that landed him in the hospital. I was with him when it happened. We'd been having breakfast in the morning room when he suddenly went pale and clutched his chest. The ambulance came, they rushed him to hospital, they stabilized him. I sat in that waiting room for 7 hours. Julian came immediately, sitting with me, holding my hand. Marcus and Diane arrived 3 hours after I'd called them, both looking more annoyed than concerned. Gerald recovered. He came home after 3 days, but I saw his medical file by accident when I brought his reading glasses to the hospital. I saw words like advanced and progressive and prognosis. I saw numbers that meant months, not years. I never told Gerald I knew. He wanted to protect me from worry, and I let him. But I knew. I understood that my husband was dying, slowly but surely. And I understood that when he died, I would be alone again, facing his children who'd spent 8 years making it clear they considered me an enemy. That's why Marcus's words yesterday had cut so deep, because they confirmed what I'd been afraid of all along, that when Gerald died, his children would do everything in their power to erase me from the family history, to take back what they considered theirs. But tomorrow, Julian would open that safe, and we'd see what Gerald had really planned. Bloco 3, Escalada, 3,000 palabras, 15 minutos, 14-24, Block 3, Escalation. The next morning, I woke early. Gerald was still sleeping beside me, his breathing steady but labored in a way that always made my chest tighten with worry. I slipped out of bed quietly and went downstairs to make coffee. The house was silent, filled with that particular quality of early morning stillness that only large old homes possess. Julian was arriving at 9. Gerald had arranged for him to access certain documents in the safe, though my husband had been vague about the details. "Just some legal paperwork," he'd said. "Julian's a lawyer now, and I want him to review a few things. Estate planning, that sort of business." I hadn't pushed for more information. Gerald's health and his mortality were topics we danced around carefully, neither of us willing to speak too directly about the inevitable. But I knew this had something to do with his will, his final arrangements, the distribution of everything he'd built over his lifetime. I was on my second cup of coffee when Gerald came down, already dressed in slacks and a cashmere sweater. He looked tired, older than he had even a month ago. "You're up early," he said, kissing the top of my head before pouring his own coffee. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Gerald, about yesterday. Marcus came by while you were at the club." His hand paused mid-pour. "Did he?" "He'd been drinking. He said some things." I hesitated, weighing how much to tell him. "Things about what would happen after you die." Gerald set the coffee pot down carefully. His jaw was tight. "What exactly did he say?" I told him. Not everything, not the full viciousness of Marcus's words, but enough. Gerald's face went dark with an anger I rarely saw in him. "That boy," he said quietly, "has always been his own worst enemy. All the advantages in the world, and he wastes every one of them." "He's frightened," I said, surprising myself by defending Marcus. "He thinks I'm going to take what's his." "What's his?" Gerald laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus has never understood that nothing was guaranteed to him. That inheritance is not a birthright, but a privilege that must be earned through character and responsibility." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Julian, precisely on time as always. My son had inherited my punctuality, along with his father's Mediterranean features. He was 32 now, a successful corporate lawyer with a firm in the city. Tall, dark-haired, with Daniel's brown eyes and serious expression. "Mum," he said, hugging me. Then to Gerald, Good morning, sir. Julian. Gerald shook his hand. Thank you for coming. Shall we go to my study? I started to excuse myself, assuming this was private business, but Gerald took my hand. No, Vivian. You should be here for this. The three of us went to Gerald's study, a wood-paneled room lined with books and family photographs. Most of the photos were of Marcus and Diane at various ages, with their mother, Catherine. There were a few of Gerald and me from our wedding and travels, but they were outnumbered. This room had always felt like a shrine to Gerald's first family, a place where I was tolerated but never truly belonged. Gerald went to the wall safe hidden behind a portrait of his father. He entered the combination and pulled out several folders, laying them on his desk. Julian, I've asked you here in your professional capacity as a lawyer, Gerald began. I need you to review these documents and explain their implications to your mother. I could do it myself, but I want her to have independent legal counsel, even if that counsel is her son. Julian's expression was professionally neutral, but I saw the concern in his eyes. Of course. What am I looking at? Gerald opened the first folder. This is my original will, drafted 10 years ago, a year before I met your mother. Everything split evenly between Marcus and Diane, with some charitable bequests. Standard estate planning for a man with 2 adult children. He opened the second folder. This is my current will, executed 3 weeks ago with my lawyer, Richard Beaumont. The distribution is quite different. I felt my heart start to pound. Julian picked up the documents, his eyes moving quickly over the pages. I watched his expression change from neutral to surprised to something close to shock. Gerald, Julian said slowly, are you certain about this? Completely certain. My husband's voice was firm. I've thought about nothing else for the past 6 months. I've consulted with Richard extensively. This is exactly what I want. What is it? I asked, unable to bear the suspense any longer. What does it say? Julian looked at me, then at Gerald. Perhaps Gerald should explain. No, Gerald said. You explain it. That's why you're here. Julian took a breath. The new will places 60% of Gerald's estate, approximately £27 million, into a trust. You, Mum, are the sole trustee and primary beneficiary during your lifetime. You have complete control over how the assets are invested and distributed. I felt the room tilt slightly. I don't understand. 20%, approximately £9 million, goes directly to me, Julian continued. Marcus and Diane each receive 10%, about £4.5 million each. But I stopped, trying to process the numbers. That's almost nothing compared to what they would have gotten. It's hardly nothing, Gerald said quietly. £4.5 million is more than most people see in a lifetime. It's a fortune by any reasonable standard. But they're expecting to split £45 million between them, I said. They think they're getting $22 million each. What they're expecting and what they deserve are 2 different things. Gerald's voice was hard now. Read the letter, Julian, the one I wrote to accompany the will. Julian pulled out another document. This one wasn't typed legal language, but handwritten on Gerald's personal stationery. He began to read aloud. To my children, Marcus and Diane, if you're reading this, I've passed on, and you're learning the contents of my will. I imagine you're shocked and angry. Perhaps you feel betrayed. But before you contest this will or attack Vivian, I want you to understand my reasoning. Julian paused, glancing at me. I nodded for him to continue. For the past 2 years, I've watched both of you carefully. Marcus, I discovered your gambling debts. £2.3 million that you've hidden from everyone, debts that you plan to pay off with your inheritance. You thought I didn't know about the loans, the bookmakers, the offshore accounts. But I have investigators, son. I've always had investigators. I felt sick. Gerald had never mentioned any of this to me. Diane, you and Edward have been living beyond your means for years. The estate in the Cotswolds that you claim is paid for? It has a mortgage of £1.8 million that you've been defaulting on. You've been counting on your inheritance to save you from bankruptcy. Julian's voice was steady, but I could see this was difficult for him to read. Both of you have treated Vivian with contempt since the day I introduced her to you. You've made it clear that you consider her an interloper, a gold digger, someone who doesn't belong in this family. You've said cruel things, you've been dismissive and cold, and through it all, she's maintained her dignity and never asked me to choose between her and you. Tears were starting to blur my vision. I'd had no idea Gerald had noticed all of this, let alone that it had affected him so deeply. But the real issue isn't how you've treated Vivian. It's what you've become. Marcus, you're 38 years old and you've never held a real job. The position I gave you at the company was charity, and you've done nothing with it. You drink too much, gamble too much, and blame everyone but yourself for your failures. Diane, you've built your entire identity around being my daughter and marrying into aristocracy. You've never developed your own interests, your own career, your own purpose beyond spending money and maintaining appearances. Gerald stood and walked to the window, his back to us. Julian kept reading. Compare that to Vivian, who built a £12 million fortune through her own intelligence and hard work. Compare it to Julian, who became a successful lawyer without any help from his stepfather. These are people who understand the value of money because they've earned it. You two only understand the value of spending it. I'm leaving you each £4.5 million. That's more than enough to pay off your debts and start fresh. If you're wise, if you invest carefully and live within your means, you'll never have to work again. But if you squander it the way you've squandered every other advantage I've given you, that's your choice. There won't be more. The bulk of my estate goes to Vivian because she's the only person I trust to honor my true legacy. Not the money, but the values I built it on. Hard work, integrity, responsibility. She'll use the trust to establish the Ashford Foundation, funding education and opportunities for young people from working-class backgrounds like the one I came from. She'll do more good with that money than either of you ever would. I loved your mother with all my heart. I love both of you, despite your flaws. But love doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior. I hope you'll take this as an opportunity to reflect on the kind of people you've become and make different choices. But whether you do or not, this is my final decision. Julian set the letter down. The silence in the room was absolute. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even process what I'd just heard. There's one more thing, Julian said quietly. He pulled out another document. This is a clause in the trust. If either Marcus or Diane contests the will, their portion is reduced to £100,000. The rest goes to charity. I won't have them dragging this through courts for years, Gerald said, still looking out the window. They accept what I'm giving them, or they get essentially nothing. I found my voice finally. Gerald, this is too much. I can't. Your children, they'll never forgive this. They'll never forgive me regardless. He turned to face me. Vivian, I'm dying. We both know it, even if we don't talk about it. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe a year if I'm lucky. I don't have time to wait for my children to grow up and become decent people. I have to protect you now, while I still can. But £27 million, I don't need that much. I have my own money. It's not about need. Gerald came and knelt beside my chair, taking my hands. It's about justice. It's about ensuring that the woman I love, the woman who made my final years happy, isn't cast aside the moment I'm gone. You heard what Marcus said to you yesterday. Do you think he was exaggerating? Do you think he wouldn't do exactly what he threatened? I thought about Marcus's face, the certainty in his voice. You're going to the streets like a dog. They'll hate me, I whispered. They already hate you, Gerald said gently. At least this way, you're protected. Julian was studying the documents carefully, his lawyer's mind working through implications. This is bulletproof, he said. Richard Beaumont knows what he's doing. The trust is irrevocable, the terms are clear, and the penalty for contestation is severe enough to discourage legal action. When were you planning to tell them? I asked Gerald. I wasn't. He stood slowly, looking every one of his 72 years. I was going to let them find out after I died, spare myself the drama. But after what Marcus said to you yesterday, I think they need to know now, while I'm still here to explain my reasoning. They'll be devastated, I said. They'll be angry, Gerald corrected. There's a difference. They're not losing anything they ever earned. They're just not getting everything they assumed was theirs by birthright. My phone buzzed. A text from Helena, my closest friend. Lunch today? Need to talk. I'd known Helena for 30 years. We'd met as junior analysts at the same firm, climbed the ranks together, stayed friends through marriages and divorces and career changes. She was one of the few people who knew the full story of my relationship with Gerald, who'd listened to me vent about Marcus and Diane over countless bottles of wine. I need to go, I said, standing. I have lunch with Helena. Of course. Gerald kissed me. Julian, would you stay? There are a few more details we need to discuss. I left them in the study and went upstairs to change. My hands were shaking as I put on a simple dress and cardigan. 27 million pounds in trust. Control over Gerald's entire legacy. The responsibility of it felt crushing. I met Helena at our usual place, a quiet bistro in Chelsea. She took one look at my face and ordered us both large glasses of wine, despite it being only noon. What happened? She asked. I told her everything. Marcus's threat, Gerald's will, the trust, all of it. Helena listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious as I talked. Jesus Christ, she said when I finished. That's extraordinary. Gerald really did that? I didn't ask him to, I said quickly. I never wanted his money. I have my own. I know that. Helena reached across the table and squeezed my hand. But Gerald knows it too. That's why he did this. He's protecting you from his awful children. They're going to think I manipulated him. An old man, not thinking clearly, influenced by his younger wife. You're 56, not 26, and Gerald is sharp as a tack. No one who knows him could possibly think he was manipulated. But they don't know him, not really. They'll see what they want to see. A gold digger who stole their inheritance. Helena sipped her wine. Let them think what they want. You know the truth. Julian knows the truth. Gerald knows the truth. That's what matters. But it wasn't what mattered, not entirely, because I still had to live with this. I had to face Marcus and Diane to watch their world crumble when they learned the truth. I had to carry the weight of Gerald's decision, even if I hadn't made it myself. When are they going to find out? Helena asked. Gerald wants to tell them soon, while he's still here to explain. That's going to be brutal. I know. I finished my wine in one long swallow. Helena, what if he's making a mistake? What if this destroys what's left of his relationship with his children? What relationship? Helena's voice was sharp. They treat him like a bank account and treat you like garbage. Gerald is finally standing up for himself and for you. Don't talk him out of it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to explode in ways none of us could predict. That Gerald's attempt to protect me was going to paint an even bigger target on my back. I went home that afternoon to find Gerald in the garden, sitting on the bench under the oak tree. It had been his wife Catherine's favorite spot. He rarely sat there, as if he was saving it for special moments of reflection. I've called Marcus and Diane, he said when I sat beside him. Ask them to come for dinner tomorrow night, both of them. I told them it was important family business. My stomach dropped. Tomorrow? No point in waiting. He took my hand. Vivian, I need you to trust me. I know what I'm doing. I've thought about this for months. They're going to blame me. Let them. His grip tightened. I'll make it very clear that this is my decision, my choice, based on their behavior over years, not anything you said or did. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining the dinner, the moment when Gerald would tell them. Marcus's rage, Diane's tears, the accusations that would come, the insistence that I'd poisoned their father's mind against them. The next day moved in slow motion. I went through my usual routine, made calls to clients, reviewed portfolios, but my mind was elsewhere. Gerald spent the day in his study, presumably preparing for the evening. Julian called twice to check on me. "Mum, you don't have to be there for this," he said. "You could go to Helena's, let Gerald handle it alone." "No," I said. "If I'm not there, they'll say I was hiding, that I was afraid to face them. I need to be present." At 6 o'clock, Diane arrived. She was wearing a Chanel suit and pearls, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She kissed Gerald's cheek and nodded coolly at me. "Father." "Vivienne." "Thank you for coming, darling," Gerald said. "Marcus should be here shortly." Marcus arrived 20 minutes late, as usual. He looked disheveled, his suit wrinkled, his eyes slightly bloodshot. He'd been drinking already. I could tell. We sat down to dinner in the formal dining room. I'd prepared Gerald's favorite meal, roast lamb with all the accompaniments. The conversation was stilted, full of long silences. Marcus drank heavily. Diane picked at her food, watching her father with barely concealed impatience. Finally, over dessert, Gerald set down his fork. "I've asked you both here because there's something you need to know," he began. "Something about my will and the future of the Ashford estate." Diane's eyes sharpened. Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "3 weeks ago, I made significant changes to my will," Gerald continued. "I want you to hear about them from me, directly, so there's no confusion." "Changes?" Diane's voice was carefully controlled. "What kind of changes?" Gerald told them. Calmly, clearly, with no emotion in his voice. The trust, the percentages, the amounts. I watched their faces change as the numbers sank in. Diane went pale, then flushed red. Marcus sat frozen, his glass halfway to his mouth. $4.5 million, Marcus said finally. "Each, that's all?" "That's all," Gerald confirmed. "And the rest?" Diane's voice was shaking. £27 million goes to her? Into a trust that Vivienne will administer, yes. Marcus stood up so violently his chair fell backward. "Are you insane? She's not even your real family." "Sit down, Marcus." "No," he was shouting now. "I won't sit down. This is insane. She's obviously manipulated you, convinced you that your own children don't deserve their inheritance." "I made this decision entirely on my own," Gerald said, his voice still calm. "Based on your behavior over the past several years." "My behavior?" Marcus laughed wildly. "What about her behavior? Coming into this family, taking over, turning you against us?" "Vivienne has done nothing except be a good wife to me. You, on the other hand, have £2.3 million in gambling debts that you've hidden from everyone." The color drained from Marcus's face. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've had investigators tracking your finances for 2 years. You've been counting on your inheritance to bail you out. Well, $4.5 million should cover your debts nicely, with plenty left over if you manage it wisely." Diane had tears streaming down her face now. "Father, please, we can fix this. Whatever we've done to upset you, we can fix it. Don't do this." "It's already done," Gerald said. "The will is signed, witnessed, and filed. The trust is irrevocable." "We'll contest it," Marcus said. "We'll take this to court. No judge will let you disinherit your own children in favor of some woman you've only known for 8 years. Read the letter I wrote explaining my decision. Read the clause about contestation. If you take this to court, you'll each get £100,000 instead of $4.5 million. The rest goes to charity." The silence that followed was deafening. I sat frozen, not daring to speak, watching Gerald's children process the fact that their father had completely outmaneuvered them. Then Diane turned to me. Her face was ugly with rage, all pretense of politeness gone. "You did this," she hissed. "You poisoned him against us. You seduced an old man and convinced him to leave everything to you." "Diane, that's enough," Gerald said sharply. "It's not enough. She's a gold digger and a manipulator, and you're too senile to see it. Get out." Gerald's voice was ice. "Both of you, get out of my house." "Your house?" Marcus laughed. "It'll be her house soon enough, apparently, along with everything else." They left, Marcus slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, Diane sobbing as she walked out. Gerald and I sat in silence at the dining table, the remains of dinner still in front of us. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," Gerald said finally. "I'm sorry you had to do it." I reached for his hand. "Gerald, are you all right?" "No," he said honestly, "but I will be. They needed to hear the truth, even if they'll never accept it." That night, lying in bed, Gerald had a cardiac episode. Not severe, but enough that I called an ambulance. We spent 6 hours in the hospital while doctors ran tests and adjusted his medications. By morning, he was stable again, but I could see the toll the stress had taken. Marcus and Diane didn't call, didn't text, didn't come to the hospital. Their father had nearly died, and they were too angry about money to check on him. That's when I finally understood. Gerald wasn't wrong about his children. He'd given them every advantage, every opportunity, and they'd squandered all of it. And now, facing consequences for the first time in their lives, all they could do was blame someone else. Me. Bloco 4. Ponto de virada. 1-200 palabras. 6 minutos. 26 block 4. Turning point. Gerald came home from the hospital on a Wednesday morning. The doctors had stabilized him, adjusted his medications again, and told me privately what I already knew. The stress wasn't helping. His heart was deteriorating faster than they'd hoped. We had months now, not a year. Maybe 6 months if we were lucky. I settled Gerald in our bedroom with strict instructions to rest. He was pale, exhausted, but stubborn as always about maintaining some independence. "I'm not an invalid," he insisted when I tried to bring him lunch in bed. "I can still walk to the dining room." "Humor me," I said, and he finally relented. That afternoon, while Gerald was sleeping, I received a call from Richard Beaumont, Gerald's lawyer. His voice was tense. "Vivienne, I need to inform you of something. Marcus Ashford contacted my office this morning. He's retained counsel and is making noise about challenging the will." My stomach dropped. "But the contestation clause, he'll lose everything." I explained that to his lawyer. "They seem to think they have grounds to argue undue influence, that Gerald wasn't of sound mind when he made the changes. That's absurd. Gerald is completely lucid. I know that. You know that. But they're going to try to paint a picture of an elderly man, recently hospitalized, influenced by a younger wife with financial motives." I sank into the chair in Gerald's study. "What do we do?" "For now, nothing. Let them spend their money on lawyers. The will is solid, the trust is irrevocable, and I have extensive documentation of Gerald's mental competency. But Vivian, I won't lie to you. This could get ugly. They're going to come after you personally." After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the family photos on Gerald's desk. Catherine smiling with young Marcus and Diane. Gerald in his prime, building his empire. I wasn't in any of these photos. I was the addition that came later, the footnote to the real family story. Helena called that evening. "I heard," she said without preamble. "Marcus is telling everyone who'll listen that you manipulated Gerald. He's calling you a gold digger at his club. Let him talk. Vivian, he's not just talking. He's building a narrative. Poor Gerald Ashford, not in his right mind, controlled by his scheming second wife. I've already heard it from 3 different people today. I felt something harden inside me. For 8 years, I'd taken the high road. I'd endured the snide comments, the cold shoulders, the casual cruelty. I'd stayed silent because I loved Gerald and didn't want to cause problems. But now Gerald was dying, and his children were trying to destroy my reputation while he could still hear them doing it. "What would you do?" I asked Helena. "Me? I'd fight back, document everything. Every debt Marcus has, every lie Diane has told, every time they've treated you or Gerald badly. Build your own case." That feels vindictive. It's not vindictive. It's survival. They're not going to stop just because Gerald said so. You need to protect yourself. After Helena hung up, I went to the safe in Gerald's study. I knew the combination. He'd given it to me years ago, along with access to all his accounts and documents. "We're married," he'd said. "We don't keep secrets." Inside the safe were files I'd never looked at before. Financial records, investigation reports, documentation that Gerald had compiled on his own children. I pulled them out and started reading. Marcus's gambling debts were worse than Gerald had said. £2.3 million was just the official debt. There were loan sharks, illegal bookmakers, people who didn't show up on official records. The investigators estimated Marcus actually owed closer to £4 million. He'd borrowed from dangerous people, the kind who didn't accept payment plans. Diane's situation was equally bad. The Cotswolds estate wasn't just mortgaged, it was in foreclosure. The bank had started proceedings 3 months ago. Diane and her aristocrat husband had been living a complete fantasy, throwing elaborate parties they couldn't afford, maintaining a lifestyle that was entirely debt-funded. But there was something else in the files, something I hadn't known about. A private investigator's report dated 6 weeks ago. Gerald had hired someone to follow Marcus after the gambling debts came to light. The report detailed Marcus meeting with a lawyer, discussing options for having Gerald declared incompetent. Medical power of attorney, conservatorship, ways to take control of Gerald's estate while he was still alive. I felt sick reading it. Marcus had been planning to have his own father declared mentally unfit so he could access the money sooner. The only thing that had stopped him was Gerald's preemptive strike with the new will. I took photos of everything with my phone. Helena was right. I needed documentation. I needed proof that Gerald's decision was based on real concerns, not manipulation by me. Gerald woke up around 7 calling for me. I put the files back and went upstairs. "What have you been doing?" he asked, studying my face. "You look upset." "Richard Beaumont called. Marcus has retained a lawyer. They're going to challenge the will." Gerald closed his eyes. "Of course they are. They can't help themselves." "Gerald, I found the investigator's report, the one about Marcus trying to have you declared incompetent." "Ah." He opened his eyes again. "You weren't supposed to see that." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have worried, and because I'd already handled it by changing the will." He reached for my hand. "Vivian, my children are desperate. Desperate people do terrible things. That's why I had to protect you now, while I still could. They're calling me a gold digger. Marcus is at his club telling everyone I manipulated you. Let him talk. Anyone who knows me knows better. But not everyone knows you. The court, if it comes to that, they'll just see an older man and a younger wife, and they'll make assumptions. The court will see medical evaluations proving I'm completely competent. They'll see financial records showing you never needed my money. They'll see documentation of my children's debts and their attempts to access my estate prematurely. Richard has built an airtight case. I wanted to believe him, but I'd seen enough of the world to know that truth didn't always win, that sometimes the narrative people wanted to believe was stronger than facts. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Not about the money, about what this is going to do to you, the stress, your heart." "I'm dying anyway," Gerald said bluntly. "Whether it's stress or heart failure or time running out, the result is the same. At least this way, I get to see you protected before I go." "Don't talk like that. We have to talk like that." He pulled me down to sit beside him on the bed. "I have maybe 6 months. We both know it. I want to spend that time making sure you're secure, not pretending everything is fine." There was a sound downstairs, the front door opening. I hadn't heard a car. Hadn't heard the doorbell. My heart started racing. "Stay here," I said to Gerald, getting up. "Vivian, don't!" But I was already moving, going down the stairs quickly. If Marcus or Diane had let themselves in again, if they were here to harass Gerald while he was recovering, I was going to call the police. But it wasn't Marcus or Diane. It was Julian, letting himself in with the key we'd given him years ago. "Mom," he said, and his face was grave. "We need to talk. I've been contacted by Marcus's lawyer." My blood went cold. "What did they want?" "They're deposing me, asking me about Gerald's mental state, about your relationship, about the new will. They want me to testify that Gerald was influenced or coerced." "What did you tell them?" "I told them to fuck off, obviously." Julian rarely swore. The fact that he had now showed how angry he was. "I'm Gerald's lawyer on this matter. Attorney-client privilege. They can't compel my testimony." But they tried. They're desperate, and desperate people don't fight fair. He looked up the stairs toward where Gerald was. "How is he?" "Weak, exhausted. This is killing him." "Then we need to end it fast." Julian's jaw was set in a way that reminded me of his father, my first husband, that same determination. "I'm going to contact Marcus's lawyer and make them an offer. They drop the contestation, accept the $4.5 million each, and we provide documentation that will keep their creditors at bay long enough for them to sort out their finances. And if they don't accept, then we release everything. The gambling debts, the illegal bookmakers, the foreclosure, the attempt to have Gerald declared incompetent. We destroy their reputations completely." "Julian, that's brutal." "They started this fight." His voice was hard. "We're just going to finish it." I thought about Marcus's face when he'd said I'd go to the streets like a dog. I thought about Diane calling me a gold digger while her father lay in a hospital bed. I thought about 8 years of cruelty masked as civility. "Do it," I said. "End this." Julian nodded. "I'll make the call tomorrow. One way or another, this will be resolved within a week." After he left, I went back upstairs. Gerald was sitting up in bed, looking more alert. "I heard," he said. "Julian's plan is sound. Marcus and Diane will accept when they realize the alternative is public humiliation. I hope you're right. I'm always right about my children. I know exactly how weak they are. That's why I structured the will the way I did." That night, I lay awake beside Gerald, listening to his labored breathing, thinking about how quickly everything had spiraled. 3 weeks ago, we'd been happy, content, living our quiet life together. Now we were in the middle of a war, and Gerald was fading, and I was terrified of what would happen when he was finally gone. Tomorrow, Julian would make his call, and then we'd see if Marcus and Diane loved their father enough to let him die in peace, or if they loved money more. Block 05. Climax. 2,500 palabras, 13 minutos, 14:27 Block 5. Climax. Julian made the call the next morning. I sat in Gerald's study with him while he spoke to Marcus's lawyer, a man named David Thornton who specialized in estate disputes. Julian had his phone on speaker so I could hear both sides of the conversation. "Mr. Thornton," Julian began, his voice professionally cool. "I'm calling to discuss a resolution to this matter before it becomes unnecessarily expensive for your clients." "Mr. Moreau," Thornton replied, and I could hear the smugness in his voice. "We're quite confident in our case. Mr. Gerald Ashford was clearly not of sound mind when he made these changes to his will. A man doesn't disinherit his own children unless he's being manipulated." "Doesn't he?" Julian's tone was mild. "Even when those children owe millions in gambling debts to illegal bookmakers? Even when they're in foreclosure on properties they claimed were paid for? Even when they attempted to have him declared incompetent so they could access his money while he was still alive?" The silence on the other end was profound. "I see we have your attention," Julian continued. "Let me be very clear about what happens next. You have 2 options. Option 1, your clients accept the terms of Gerald Ashford's will, £4.5 million each. We'll provide a one-time financial consultation to help them manage their debts and avoid bankruptcy. This offer expires in 72 hours. And option 2? Thornton's voice was harder now. Option 2, we go to court. And when we do, we present evidence of every debt, every lie, every attempt to manipulate or control Gerald Ashford. We call the bookmakers Marcus owes money to. We subpoena the foreclosure documents on Diane's property. We present the investigator's report showing Marcus tried to have his father declared incompetent. And we make sure every detail is public record. That's blackmail. That's consequence, Julian corrected. Your clients have been spreading lies about my mother, calling her a gold digger and claiming she manipulated Gerald. We're simply prepared to present the truth about why Gerald made the decisions he did. If that truth is uncomfortable for your clients, that's their problem. I need to consult with Marcus and Diane. You have 72 hours. After that, we assume you're choosing option 2, and we proceed accordingly. Julian hung up. His hands were shaking slightly, but his face was set. That was perfect, I said. It was necessary. He looked at me. Mum, are you prepared for them to choose option 2? For this to go public? If that's what it takes to protect Gerald's wishes, yes. But I wasn't prepared, not really. Because 2 hours later, Marcus showed up at the house. Not with his lawyer, not with Diane, but alone and very, very drunk. I was in the garden when I heard him shouting. Gerald was upstairs resting, and I'd been trying to clear my head with some fresh air. I rushed inside to find Marcus in the front hallway, being blocked by Mrs. Davies, our housekeeper. Get out of my way, Marcus was yelling at her. This is my father's house. I have every right to be here. Mr. Marcus, you need to leave, Mrs. Davies said firmly. Mr. Ashford is resting and cannot be disturbed. I don't care if he's sleeping. I need to talk to him. I need to make him understand what she's doing to him. Marcus. My voice was calm, controlled. You need to leave. He spun around to face me. His eyes were wild, his face flushed. He'd been drinking heavily. I could smell it from across the room. You, he said, pointing at me. You think you're so clever, don't you? Turning my own father against me, stealing everything he built. I haven't stolen anything. Gerald made his own decisions. Bullshit. He stumbled forward, and Mrs. Davies moved protectively in front of me. You got into his head. You made him think we don't care about him. You poisoned him against his own children. The only poisoning was done by your own actions, I said. Your gambling debts, your lies, your attempt to have him declared incompetent. Marcus's face went white. How did you know about that? Gerald knew. He's known for months. He had investigators following you, documenting everything. That's invasion of privacy. That's illegal. It's due diligence, and it's exactly why he changed his will. Marcus lunged forward suddenly, pushing past Mrs. Davies. I stepped back, my heart racing, but he didn't touch me. Instead, he grabbed a crystal vase from the hall table and threw it against the wall. It shattered, sending glass flying across the marble floor. Marcus, stop, I shouted. No. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face. This was supposed to be mine. All of it. I'm his son, his blood. Not you, not Julian, me. I'm supposed to inherit this. You were supposed to be a good son first, I said quietly. You were supposed to earn it. Earn it, he laughed wildly. I'm his child. I shouldn't have to earn what's mine by birthright. That's exactly your problem. You think you're entitled to everything without having to work for anything. What's going on here? Gerald's voice came from the top of the stairs. He was in his robe, looking frail and exhausted, but his voice was strong. Marcus, what the hell are you doing in my home? Dad. Marcus's voice broke. Please. You have to listen to me. She's manipulating you. Can't you see that? She's turned you against your own children. I turned myself against you, Gerald said, coming slowly down the stairs. I moved to help him, but he waved me off. You did that, Marcus. with your lies and your debts and your complete inability to take responsibility for your own life. I made mistakes, but I'm your son. That has to count for something. It does count for something. That's why you're getting £4.5 million instead of being completely disinherited. Marcus's face crumpled. That's nothing. That's insulting. That's more than you deserve based on how you've lived your life. Gerald reached the bottom of the stairs. But it's what I'm giving you, because despite everything, I still love you, even though you've given me no reason to. Dad, please. Marcus actually fell to his knees. I'll change. I'll get help for the gambling. I'll pay back the debts. Just don't do this. Don't leave everything to her. I'm not leaving everything to her. I'm leaving it in trust for the Ashford Foundation. Vivian will administer it, yes, but it's not for her personal use. It's to help young people from backgrounds like mine. People who actually want to work hard and build something meaningful. What about Diane? What about your grandchildren? Diane is getting the same as you. As for my grandchildren, they'll benefit if they're willing to work for it. The foundation will provide scholarships, mentorship, opportunities, but not handouts. Never handouts. Marcus looked up at his father, and I saw something die in his eyes. The last hope that Gerald might relent, might change his mind, might save him from the consequences of his own choices. You're choosing her over your own children, Marcus said flatly. I'm choosing integrity over entitlement, Gerald replied. I wish you could see the difference. Marcus stood slowly. He looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over. I'll fight this until I have nothing left. Then you'll have nothing left, Gerald said. The choice is yours. Accept what I'm offering and rebuild your life, or waste everything on lawyers and end up with even less. Marcus walked out, slamming the door so hard the remaining pictures on the wall rattled. Gerald swayed slightly, and I rushed to support him. You shouldn't have come down, I said. Your heart. My heart is fine. Well, no, it isn't, but this needed to be said. He let me help him to the sitting room, where he collapsed into his favorite chair. Call Julian. Tell him what happened. We need documentation of Marcus's behavior. Mrs. Davies saw everything, I said. Good. Have her write a statement. We'll need it if this goes to court. But it didn't go to court. Because that evening, Diane arrived. Unlike Marcus, she was sober, composed, and coldly furious. She didn't knock. She let herself in with a key I hadn't known she still had and walked directly into the sitting room where Gerald and I were having tea. Father, she said, ignoring me completely. We need to talk, privately. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of Vivienne. Fine. Diane sat down without being invited, crossing her legs elegantly. She was wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. I've spoken with Marcus. He told me about your conversation today, about his rather dramatic display. It was pathetic, Gerald said bluntly. It was desperate. But then, we're all desperate now, aren't we? You've made sure of that. Diane's voice was controlled, but I could see the rage beneath the surface. I want you to understand something, Father. Marcus may be willing to accept your scraps and your charity, but I'm not. You don't have a choice, don't I? She smiled coldly. You talk about integrity and responsibility. But let's talk about your integrity, shall we? You married Vivian 8 years ago. You were 64, she was 48. A 16-year age gap. Some people might call that a midlife crisis. Some people would be wrong. Perhaps, but juries are unpredictable, especially when presented with a narrative about a lonely widower, grieving his beloved first wife, taken advantage of by an attractive younger woman with financial expertise. I felt ice in my veins. That's not what happened, isn't it? Diane finally looked at me. You had £12 million, you said. But who verified that? How do we know you didn't exaggerate your wealth to seem like an equal partner? How do we know you weren't actually in debt, desperate, looking for a wealthy older man to solve your problems? That's a lie, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I have documentation of every pound I've earned. Documentation can be fabricated, especially by someone with your financial expertise. Diane turned back to Gerald. Here's what's going to happen, Father. You're going to reconsider this ridiculous will. You're going to divide your estate equally among your children, as any rational person would, and Vivian will receive a reasonable widow's settlement, £1 million, let's say. Enough to be comfortable, but not enough to be suspicious. And if I refuse? Gerald's voice was dangerous. Then I'll take this to court, and I'll make sure the entire process is as public and humiliating as possible. I'll bring in doctors to testify about your heart condition, about how medication can affect judgment. I'll bring in experts on elder manipulation. I'll make sure every newspaper in London covers the trial of Gerald Ashford, the property magnate who disinherited his own children for his gold-digging second wife. You would destroy your father's reputation to get money? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I would protect my father from a manipulative woman, yes. Diane's eyes were cold, and if his reputation suffers in the process, well, that's the price of justice. Gerald stood up slowly. He walked over to where Diane was sitting and looked down at her. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with a disappointment so profound it made my chest ache. You know what the saddest part of this is? He said. Your mother would be ashamed of you. Catherine was the kindest, most generous woman I ever knew. She believed in helping people, in building them up, in making the world better. And I thought I'd raised you with those values. But somewhere along the way, you became this. Someone who would threaten and blackmail her own father for money. Diane's composure finally cracked. Tears filled her eyes. Don't you dare speak for my mother. You have no idea what she would think. I was married to her for 35 years. I think I have some idea. Gerald returned to his chair. Here's what's going to happen, Diane. You and Marcus have 72 hours to accept the terms of my will. If you do, you each get £4.5 million and we help you manage your debts. If you don't, you each get £100,000 and we release everything. The gambling debts, the foreclosure, the attempted conservatorship, all of it. You wouldn't. Try me. Gerald's voice was steel. I'm dying, Diane. I have nothing left to lose. But you do. You have your reputation, your social standing, your marriage to Lord Pemberton. How do you think he'll react when he learns the Cotswolds estate is in foreclosure? That you've been lying to him about your finances? Diane stood abruptly. I won't forget this, either of you. I don't expect you to, Gerald said, but you will accept it, because the alternative is worse, and you're smart enough to know that. After Diane left, Gerald had another episode. Smaller than before, but enough that I made him take his medication and lie down. I sat beside him in our bedroom, holding his hand, watching him breathe. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Sorry you had to witness that. Sorry my children are so horrible to you. It's not your fault. It is, though. I raised them, or failed to raise them properly. Somewhere I went wrong. You loved them. That's not wrong. But I didn't teach them that love requires reciprocity. That being someone's child doesn't entitle you to everything they have. He closed his eyes. Catherine would have handled this better. Catherine isn't here, but I am, and we'll get through this together. The next day, Julian called. Thornton contacted me. Marcus and Diane are accepting the terms. They'll sign the documentation tomorrow. I felt relief wash over me. It's over? It's over, Julian confirmed. They're not happy about it, but they're accepting it. Probably realized that fighting would cost them more than they'd gain, I told Gerald, and for the first time in weeks, I saw him truly smile. Good, he said. Now maybe we can have some peace in my final months. But as I looked at my husband, seeing how much this fight had cost him, how much weaker he'd become, I wondered if the peace had come too late, if the damage was already done. That evening, the doorbell rang. It was a courier with an envelope addressed to me. Inside was a single piece of paper. A note, handwritten in Marcus's scrawl. You won. But when he's gone, you'll have nothing but money. And that won't keep you warm at night. That won't make you family. You'll always be the outsider who stole what wasn't hers. Remember that when you're alone in this big house. I crumpled the note and threw it in the fire. But his words stayed with me. Because part of me feared he was right. That when Gerald died, I would be alone. That the money would be no comfort. That I would spend the rest of my life as the villain in a story I never chose to be part of. Gerald found me crying in the library later that night. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside me. I showed him the note. He read it and his face hardened. "Marcus is a child throwing a tantrum," he said. "Don't let his bitterness poison you." "But what if he's right? What if when you're gone, I'm just alone with all this money and no family? You have Julian. You have Helena. You have people who love you for who you are, not what you have." Gerald took my hands. "And you have a purpose. The foundation, helping young people, building something that matters. That's more family than most people ever have." I wanted to believe him. But sitting there in that moment, with Gerald dying and his children hating me and the future stretching out empty and alone, I felt the weight of every choice that had led me here, and I wondered if any amount of money was worth the price I was about to pay. Bloco 6, Resolución, 1500 palabras, 17 minutos, 14:29. Block 6, Resolution. Gerald died on a Tuesday morning in April, 4 months after that final confrontation with his children. He went peacefully, in our bed, with me holding his hand and Julian sitting on his other side. We'd known it was coming. The doctors had stopped being optimistic weeks earlier, but knowing didn't make it easier. Marcus and Diane came to the funeral. They sat in the front row of the church, dressed in expensive black, their faces appropriately somber. To anyone watching, we looked like a united family grieving together. No one could see the chasm between us. At the reception afterward, held at the Kensington House, Diane approached me for the first time in months. She was holding a glass of wine, her face carefully neutral. "Vivienne," she said quietly, "I wanted to say something." I braced myself for another attack. "Yes? I don't like you. I probably never will, but my father loved you, and that has to mean something." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The foundation, the work you're planning with the trust, it's what he would have wanted, so I won't fight you on it anymore." It wasn't an apology, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, and from Diane, that was more than I'd expected. "Thank you," I said. Marcus didn't speak to me at all. He stayed on the opposite side of the room, drinking steadily, his face a mask of suppressed rage. When he left, he didn't say goodbye. The will was read the following week. Richard Beaumont gathered us in his office, the same space where Gerald had signed those final documents months earlier. Marcus and Diane sat across from Julian and me, the desk between us like a neutral zone. Richard read the terms we already knew, the trust, the percentages, the foundation. Marcus and Diane's faces remained impassive. They'd already signed the acceptance documents. There was nothing left to fight about. After the reading, Marcus stood to leave immediately, but Diane lingered. "The $4.5 million, she said to Richard. "When will it be transferred?" "Within 30 days, as specified in the will." She nodded. Then, looking at me, "I've already contacted the bank about the foreclosure. With this money, Edward and I can settle everything and start fresh." "That's good," I said, and meant it. "Gerald wanted you to have that chance." "Did he?" Her smile was bitter. "Or did he just want to punish us one last time before he died?" "He wanted you to learn responsibility," I said. "There's a difference." Diane left without responding. Marcus was already gone. Julian and I sat with Richard for another hour, going over the details of the trust administration, the foundation setup, all the practical matters that death leaves behind. That evening I sat alone in Gerald's study. The house felt enormous and empty without him. Mrs. Davies had gone home. Julian had offered to stay, but I'd sent him back to his own life. I needed to be alone with my grief. I opened the safe one more time and pulled out Gerald's letter. Not the one he'd written to Marcus and Diane, but the one he'd written to me. Richard had given it to me after the funeral. "He left this for you specifically," Richard had said, with instructions to deliver it only after he was gone. I unfolded the pages, seeing Gerald's handwriting, and started to read. "My dearest Vivian, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're sitting in my study, probably wondering what happens next, probably feeling alone and uncertain, and questioning whether any of this was worth it. It was worth it. Every moment with you was worth it. I know my children made your life difficult. I know they never accepted you, never gave you the respect you deserved. I know I failed to protect you from their cruelty as often as I should have. That's my greatest regret, not standing up for you more forcefully while I was alive. But I'm standing up for you now. The trust, the foundation, the control I've given you over my legacy, these are my final acts of love and protection. Use them well. Build something that matters. Help young people the way no one helped me when I was starting out. Don't let Marcus and Diane's bitterness poison your memories of our time together. We were happy. We loved each other. That was real, no matter what story they choose to tell about us. You gave me 8 years of joy when I thought my life was over. You made me laugh. You challenged me intellectually. You treated me as an equal partner, not an elderly man to be managed. You gave me a reason to look forward to each day. I'm sorry I can't give you more time. I'm sorry I'm leaving you to face the aftermath alone. But you're strong enough. You've always been strong enough. That's one of the first things I loved about you. Live well, my darling. Travel, invest, build the foundation. Help people. Don't isolate yourself in grief. Helena will try to drag you back to life. Let her. Julian will worry about you. Let him. And maybe, someday, let yourself love again. You're only 56. You have decades ahead of you. Don't spend them alone just because I'm gone. I love you. I always will. Thank you for making my final years the best ones of my life." "Yours always, Gerald," I cried then. Really cried, for the first time since he'd died. Not the controlled tears at the funeral or the quiet grief in front of others, but the deep, wrenching sobs of true loss. He was gone, the man who'd loved me, protected me, chosen me over his own children's comfort. And I was alone with the consequences of that choice. But as the tears finally subsided, I realized something. I wasn't entirely alone. I had Julian, who'd stood by me through everything. I had Helena, who'd called me every day since Gerald's death. I had Richard Beaumont, who'd made it clear he was committed to helping me manage the trust properly. And I had purpose. The Ashford Foundation was real now, not just a plan in Gerald's will, but something I could actually build, something that would help young people from backgrounds like Gerald's, give them opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. The next morning, I called Richard and asked him to set up a meeting with the Foundation's board. Gerald had established it with carefully chosen members, people who shared his values about education and opportunity. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the work. We established scholarship programs at 3 universities. We created mentorship initiatives connecting successful professionals with students from working-class backgrounds. We funded vocational training programs for young people who wanted to learn trades rather than pursue traditional academics. It felt good. Better than sitting in the empty house grieving. Better than dwelling on Marcus's hatred or Diane's cold tolerance. Better than wondering if Gerald's sacrifice had been worth it. Helena dragged me to lunch one day, 3 months after Gerald's death. We sat at our usual place in Chelsea, and she studied me critically. "You look better," she said. "Less like a ghost." "I feel better," I admitted. The foundation work helps. It feels like I'm honoring Gerald properly. Good, because I was worried you'd become one of those tragic widows who just fade away. I'm too stubborn for that. Yes, you are. Helena smiled. Have you heard from Marcus or Diane? Nothing from Marcus. Diane sends occasional updates through Richard about the foundation, very formal and professional. I think we've reached a permanent détente. And you're okay with that? I am, actually. I don't need them to like me. I don't even need them to acknowledge that Gerald's decision was right. I just need them to leave me alone to do the work he wanted done. 6 months after Gerald's death, the foundation held its first scholarship ceremony. 30 young people received full university funding. I gave a speech about Gerald's vision, his belief that talent and hard work deserved support regardless of background. Julian attended, proud and supportive. Helena came, bringing her new girlfriend. Richard Beaumont was there with his wife. It felt like family, the family I'd chosen and built, rather than the one I'd inherited through marriage. Diane sent a formal note of congratulations but didn't attend. Marcus sent nothing at all. A year after Gerald's death, I was sitting in the study again, reviewing foundation applications, when the doorbell rang. It was Diane. She was alone, looking uncertain in a way I'd never seen before. I'm sorry to come unannounced, she said, but I wanted to talk to you. Actually talk, not through lawyers or formal letters. I let her in, made tea, and we sat in the morning room where Gerald and I had spent so many quiet evenings together. I've been thinking a lot about my father, Diane said, about the choices he made, the will, the foundation, everything. And? I kept my voice neutral. And I think I understand now, not completely, but partially. She set down her teacup. Edward and I almost lost everything, you know. The foreclosure, the debts, the $4.5 million saved us, but just barely. We've had to completely change how we live. Smaller house, fewer staff, actual budgets. That sounds difficult. It was. It is. But it's also been clarifying. I spent my entire life defining myself by what I had, not who I was. My father saw that. He tried to save me from it, even if I couldn't see it at the time. He loved you, I said quietly. He just wanted you to be better than you were allowing yourself to be. I know that now. Diane looked at me directly. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't expect us to be friends. But I wanted you to know that I'm not fighting anymore. The foundation is doing good work. My father would be proud. After she left, I sat for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and family and the complicated legacies we leave behind. Gerald had wanted to protect me, yes, but he'd also wanted to save his children from themselves. Whether he'd succeeded was still an open question. But standing in that house, alone but not lonely, running a foundation that was changing lives, I realized something important. Marcus had been wrong in his final note to me. I wasn't just the outsider who'd stolen what wasn't hers. I was the guardian of Gerald's true legacy, the one built on values rather than money. And that, finally, was enough. I picked up my phone and called Julian. Want to come over for dinner? I asked. I'm making that lamb recipe your stepfather loved. I'll be there in an hour, he said. As I hung up and went to the kitchen to start cooking, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but peace. The knowledge that I'd survived the worst and come through still standing. Gerald had given me 8 years of love and a lifetime of purpose. His children had given me conflict and pain. But in the end, I'd given myself something more valuable than either, the strength to build a life worth living, even after everything had fallen apart. The house in Kensington didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like mine. And tomorrow, I would wake up and continue the work Gerald had started, helping young people build better futures than they'd been given. That was the real inheritance. Not the money, not the property, not the trust. The chance to make something good out of grief. the opportunity to prove that love and character mattered more than blood and entitlement. And as I seasoned the lamb, setting the table for two, waiting for my son to arrive, I knew with absolute certainty that Gerald would approve.